All right, back in action to break down the Thursday, April 30th EU Masters slate on DK. If you played yesterday, it was pretty entertaining. We had three teams finishing a three-way tie for the last two spots to advance at 4-2. A lot of fireworks. Ended up coming down to the last match where LDLC had to beat DK to push it to the tiebreaker. So hopefully we can get some fireworks on the slate today as well. So let's jump in. Today is Group A. You can see the standings right there. Schedule right here. I'm going to do things a little differently today and kind of just start by going over some notes that will apply to the slate as a whole. The first is I think we should probably expect a change in the pace of matches. As I mentioned, I think a lot of people are just going to go back and look at the score of the prior slate in terms of kills and base their decisions off of that. So this is the teams that played on yesterday's slate, and it's their kills plus deaths. The first column here is the first week of matches, and then this column is yesterday's matches, so the second week. So I thought this was pretty interesting. Every team's pace increased from week 1 to week 2. Um, Obviously, Vodafone and LDLC were already up there in terms of pace, but Rogue and Diffuse Kids in particular had some pretty significant jumps. So um, what do we make of that? Well, I tend to think that teams like Rogue and Diffuse, who were sitting in the bottom of the standings, they realized that their tactics weren't working, so they had to increase their aggression. Obviously, that did not matter for DK. They continued to lose, but for Rogue, it made a huge difference, and now they've pushed this to a tiebreaker. So um, I think that is something that I would look for today. We could see a bit higher pace in all of these games. Um, Another thing to think about is when you have every team playing 3 matches in one day, this increases the likelihood that you're going to see variance occur. Um, for example, a team like Vodafone yesterday, they were 3-0 in the first week, and then they played 3 matches in one day, and all of a sudden you see them drop 2 games. So I guess my point is, the favorite can't win every match and probably won't, especially when there's 6 different matches in one day. All right, let's take a look at this slate. It's going to be the same setup with 3 2-game slates. One thing I did for the slate yesterday was build lineups for all 3 slates ahead of time. I'm not going to do that today. I will build, obviously, ahead of time for the first slate, but I do think that since it's a really fluid situation, in the second and third slate, the context of what occurred prior is going to matter into how these teams approach each match. So I think you're probably better off just waiting and kind of observing the first couple games and then building your lineups for the second slate at that time and then doing the same thing during the third and fourth game for the final slate. So it's another thing to think about there. And looking at these teams here, Gamers Origin obviously played by far the best. Only died 6.3 times per game, which is really impressive. Gamer Legion and YDN Devils, not too far off in terms of kills and deaths over here. They played at the same pace, and then you have BT who played at the slowest pace, and that's basically just because they were not getting any kills of their own. And again, this is kills per game, deaths per game, combined kills and deaths a game, which kind of shows us their pace. Towers won per game here, Towers lost per game here, and you can see there's an inverse relationship there. And then dragons per game. It is kind of interesting that BT actually averaged tied with Gamers Origin for the best at 3 dragons per game. So they were doing something right, but they obviously were not winning their matches. Another interesting thing about this slate is the implied kill totals for each match is pretty much uniform throughout all 6 games. And that's because unlike yesterday, we have 4 teams that are all playing within 4 kills plus deaths pace of each other. So it's a pretty narrow band. So one point that raises is I talked a lot yesterday about game stacks being viable. I'm not sure it is as viable today, and that's because I think I don't think there's any 2 teams that you're going to see play where the loser has a strong chance of getting more kills than the winner of the other match, and that's because they're all so close in pace. We did have one match yesterday. Yeah, it was the LDLC Vodafone match where LDLC put up 20 kills and a loss, and then Rogue only put up 15 in a win. So that was one slate where the game stack was optimal, but I do find that a bit less likely today. Another kind of overarching point to think about is I discussed yesterday that a couple teams have to play back-to-back games. Obviously, a really small sample size, but LDLC and Rogue both won the second of their back-to-back matches, and it happened to be against Vodafone both times, who, despite losing twice, I think probably are still the strongest team in that group. So, again, small sample size, but maybe there's something to that. Maybe being warmed up after just playing is kind of an edge for that team. So today, it's YDN has a back-to-back at 1 and 2. So I might put a little advantage for YDN in this 2 p.m. match. And then Excel's got back-to-back games at 3 and 4. And the nice part is that they've got YDN in the second match, and YDN's the weakest team outside of Excel in this group, so that could be a nice spot for Excel right there. All right, what else do we have? As I mentioned, I'm not going to build for the later slates just yet, and that's because it's a fluid situation. Yesterday was perhaps rare in that it went down to the very final match. So at least one team in every match on that slate had something to play for at all times. That may not be the case going forward in the next couple days or on this slate today. So the thing I would keep an eye out for is if you have a match where neither team has anything to play for towards the end of the slate, you could see a fiesta where there's just a ton of kills on both sides. So that's something to keep a close eye on in the second and third slate. As I discussed at length yesterday, stacking the 2 favorite teams is going to be very chalky. Probably even more so today when game stacks look less viable. So perhaps you can make the argument that even though a game stack is less likely to occur today, there would be even bigger leverage in it, because I don't think a lot of people will be willing to take that route. The other thing to keep in mind is that on these 2 game slates, there's so much overlap. So not only have to get the 2 top kill teams, which is most often going to be the 2 winning teams, correct, but you have to get almost every spot on your roster correct, meaning you have to pick the player from either of the winning teams that's going to get the higher fantasy score. So, um, I think you just kind of need to take a stance on the two teams that you think are going to have the most kills, and then be very, you need to look at the kills and assists from each player on each team, perhaps their averages or what they did in the first three games, and try to figure out what are going to be the highest upside players if that team does win. Just some team notes here to cover. Gamers Origin, the thing that sticks out again is that they only died 6.3 times per game, so perhaps not much upside for their opponents. Um, Gamer Legion and YDM were tied for the highest pace, but it wasn't significantly higher than Gamers Origin or BT. Um, I think BT is a very interesting team to look at today. They're obviously 3-0, so they basically need to win out here to have a chance. Um, so they're going to have to change their tactics. It was kind of like DK and Rogue yesterday, where it was clear what they were doing wasn't working, so they had to get more aggressive. And like I said, that did work for Rogue. And I think some people would argue that BT is just as, if not more talented roster-wise as Rogue. So during the UK LC regular season, BT was actually really impressive. They were 14-0. They ended up losing to Fnatic Rising in the final. They're actually, they're a solid team. They're 2-1 in their group in this competition. So that kind of gives you an indication of the potential that they have. They were also in the summer 2019 Euro Masters. They won 50% of their matches there. So my point is, I think with a week to kind of look at where they went wrong in those first three matches, I do expect them to come out here and make some tactical changes, and perhaps get some different results. Um, on BTXL, also Deadly, the ADC, he's like the entire team. He had 87.5% kill participation and about 34% damage dealt, which was easily the highest on the team. So if BT is able to pick up some wins today, that is definitely the player that I'd be looking to captain, just because he clearly has the most upside. Uh, so I'm not going to break down the two later slates, just because, like I said, it's a fluid situation and so much could change. So it's kind of silly to try to sit here and anticipate what the context will be for those matches, and I think what occurs before them will be very important anyway. Um, in terms of the early slate, though, Gamer Legion and Excel is the first match. You know, it could be a spot to look at Excel, who are going to come out and probably change their tactics. You could get some leverage in taking them over Gamer Legion, and Gamer Legion was tied for the highest pace in the first three games, so it could be good kill total for the game, or for the team that ends up winning this game. Another thing I'll touch on is that if you look at Excel's kill plus death trend from their first three matches, they went 15 to 17 up to 26. This is exactly what we saw out of DK and Rogue. In their first three games, they were trending upwards, and that continued into the matches yesterday. So I think, again, that's probably an indication that they started to realize that they needed to change their tactics and become a little more aggressive. So, I'm thinking that this game against Gamer Legion is going to see a kill plus death total over 26. So that would be something to think about targeting. The Gamers Origin and YDN Devils game is next. Gamers Origin won this 11-8 last time out. Gamers Origin is going to be very chalky because they're like a 82% favorite here. So perhaps stacking them with Excel, if they can pull out the win, would be one route to get a little a little more leverage here. That pretty much covers everything I wanted to touch on. Over here in this tab, I just took the player scoring averages from the first three matches and then sorted them by that. Again, these are averages, so obviously if a team wins or loses, these numbers can be drastically different, but I think it kind of gives you a picture of where the scoring came from over the first three matches, and obviously it was a ton of Gamers Origin. But then you'll see some notable ones like Ends for YDN had a pretty high average, even though they only won one match. So that's encouraging. And look, and then as I mentioned again, Deadly for Excel is the only player from Excel that really was able to get anything going. So like I said, if Excel is able to win, I think he's a player that is going to benefit. I think that touches on all the notes for today. Yeah, so good luck out there. As I said, with the later slates, it's a fluid situation, so just keep an eye on what happens. I think the biggest thing is if you've got two teams that have nothing to play for towards the end, perhaps YDN and BT, you could see a fiesta, so that would be a potential game stack situation. All right, thanks for watching and good luck out there today, and I will see you back on Friday for the next slate.